Well, it finally happened. Ukraine just shot down a Russian helicopter with a drone, and the Russians aren't even disputing this. Well, sort of. I mean, some are saying that the helicopter safely landed after being hit, which is, a bit of a stretch. But we've also got Ukraine shutting off the lights in Belgorod after hitting a power plant, satellite imagery confirming recent strikes in Crimea, and details of how Azov sealed off last month's breakthrough near Pokrovsk, saying of the Russian soldiers, quote, "They're encircled and will wait until they surrender, withdraw, or die." Now, starting with the helicopter interception, which I believe is the first one in history. We've seen some close calls, no doubt, but I don't think we've actually seen an FPV-style drone fly into, detonate, and shoot down an enemy helicopter. So here it is. What we know at this point is a Russian Mi-8 helicopter was brought down by one of the units in the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces. That's a grouping of units, K2, Phoenix, HIMARS birds, and a lot of others, so it's not entirely clear which specific unit carried out this strike, and it does look like it happened in the Kharkiv region. I'm sure we'll get more details soon, and they were pretty quick to release this footage. Now, in looking at the assessment here, kind of what the major takeaway is, not a lot, because we've known that this has been in the cards for a while. This was just a matter of time until it happened. Now, originally, when FPV drones started to really kind of permeate the battlefield, we saw helicopters move back a little bit of a distance from the front. But they're still showing up from time to time. And recently, we've seen more and more drones with significantly extended range. Some of these being dropped off of motherships, pushing their range out 40, 50 plus kilometers. What that means is that these helicopters that even recently have been used in more of a logistics role behind the front, not crossing over the front lines into Ukrainian territory, can't even be used in that regard everywhere. So again, this one looks like it happened in the Kharkiv region, but I would imagine you're going to see helicopters, Russian helicopters, moved even further back from operating near the front lines. Just had to happen. It was always a risk. Now it's a very real thing that has occurred. That's going to be the direct result. Now we also got breaking news yesterday. I mean, this is the first time that I'm tracking. It sounds like a Ukrainian HIMARS struck a thermal power plant in Belgorod. That's according to some Russian Telegram channels. Haven't seen confirmation from the Ukrainian side. But if you take a look at some of this footage, and we've got different videos coming from Belgorod, the one that I thought was most notable was somebody filming at night, and you see the lights go out across the entire city just as the impact occurs. According to the Kyiv Independent, they say power outages were reported across Belgorod following the attack that struck one of the substations. That's according to Russian media. And the Belgorod governor confirmed a strike on critical infrastructure as well as significant power outages. Now, the Ukrainian presidential advisor Yermak put out a statement saying, quote, "A strictly symmetrical response to Russia's strikes on infrastructure. To their terror, we will accelerate the path to ending the war. The price for Russia will be high. It will feel the consequences of its military strategy, which is based on killing civilians. This is no longer 2022 with aerial terror. It would be better if Russia stopped this war." Now, this specific power plant strike came alongside a series of Russian strikes being carried out against energy infrastructure inside of Ukraine. Number of videos yesterday showing Garan or long-range drones being utilized to hit substations in various portions of the country. Now, Yermak is saying that it would be better for Russia to stop this war, or you're going to see a continuation of these strikes that are going to make life harder and harder for the citizens across the country. For now, unfortunately, the war is not over, so we are continuing on with some ongoing fundraisers, including one that we just kicked off a couple days ago with Ukraine Aid Operations to pick up drones for the Ukrainian units fighting in the eastern portion of the country. We're running this through Ukraine Aid Operations. We've hit $85,000 in 3 days. $15,000 increase in the last 24 hours or less, which is insane. You guys are so incredibly generous. Now, a big benefit here is Ukraine Aid Operations is a registered 501c3, which means that every donation is fully tax deductible. We also have a one-to-one donor match, so you put in $1, $2 goes to the effort, or $100, $200 goes to support these units. And it's a number of units that we're supporting in the eastern portion of the country, 79th, 25th, Azov, Special Operations Forces, and quite a bit more. We should be actually have an interview this week as part of this campaign. That's a benefit of being able to do this, is we get to interact directly with some of the soldiers that we are helping to support to help keep you all informed as to how the war is actually playing out day in and day out. So if interested and able, the link to contribute to that fundraiser is in the description and pinned comment below. Now, a major point of discussion in recent days has been about the change in tone from the U.S. administration towards Ukraine. We saw President Trump stepping out of the United Nations General Assembly and all of a sudden saying, hey, Ukraine can actually win this war. And we saw some key administration officials kind of fall in line, essentially. If nothing else, they're not being as combative towards Ukraine as they once were and starting to put a little bit more pressure on Russia. One of the major questions there has been, what is the U.S. thinking about supplying to Ukraine to assist in this effort? Because we know the U.S. strategy, and we'll get into this here in a minute with a quote from Vice President Vance, has been to provide weaponry for NATO countries or any U.S. allies to purchase and then provide to Ukraine if they so choose. One of the questions right now has been around Tomahawk cruise missiles. These are a weapon that we have used quite often in a lot of different strikes. We've used them most recently, I believe, in these strikes against the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. Very capable, very long-range weapon systems. It's a big warhead that can go a long distance and is hard to intercept. So it'd be of great value to Ukraine. And there's some talk, more and more, that might be in the next round of shipments. Here's J.D. Vance answering that specific question.
Well, one of the things I've always said, Martha, is I wanted the Europeans to step up in a big way. I wanted us, the United States, to stop shoveling money and weaponry to a conflict that was so far away, when I felt like the Europeans, with all due respect for them, were not actually taking their fair share of the burden. Because of the president's leadership, you now have the Europeans buying weaponry from the United States as opposed to us giving it. And you asked this question about Tomahawks. It's something the president's going to make the final determination on. What the president is going to do is what's in the best interest of the United States of America. That's the driving light between his foreign policy decisions, between his defense policy decisions, and that will be the same heuristic that we apply to how we answer this question about Tomahawks. I'll let the president speak to it, but I know that we're having conversations this very minute about that issue.
Now, look, you're not going to get a clear answer on yes, this is going, no, it's, well, we used to get the no, it's off the table, but you're not going to hear a clear, definitive yes on this. Again, it's kind of complicated with, are we authorizing the sale of that weapon system to our allies? Sure, that's in the cards. Would we authorize, after the sale, our allies sending that to Ukraine is another question. And then the most important question here, I would say, is will we authorize or permit Ukraine to utilize these weapon systems anywhere they see fit in Russia? You got to think that dynamic changes a little bit if these weapon systems are coming from the UK or Germany or France or someone else. Even if they're purchasing those from the United States, I don't know that we'll have the same level of oversight that we have when we provide those weapon systems directly. But when it comes to the Tomahawks, Russia right out the gate was not happy about this and talked about this would be direct war between NATO and Russia. They've changed their tone all of a sudden, with Kremlin spokesperson Peskov saying, quote, if Ukraine is supplied with Tomahawk cruise missiles, nothing will change on the front. Okay, so we'll see, I guess. Now, these are not weapon systems that would be utilized against Russian frontline positions. These are deep strikes going after Russian airfields, maybe energy infrastructure, supply points, logistics, headquarters facilities, and so on. So this is not something that is going to hit Russian soldiers getting ready to attack Ukrainian positions. These would be used almost exclusively, given their range, to hit sensitive targets deep inside of Russian territory. Now, on that question of can Ukraine do that? We've been back and forth on this for quite a while. Ukraine has the capabilities, not just with their domestic weapon systems, but with Western-provided weapon systems, to strike a number of targets deep inside of Russia, and they largely haven't, which is why the strike just yesterday, if it really was a HIMARS being used against Belgorod, means, okay, maybe they do have that authority. President Zelensky, in an interview a couple days ago with Barak Ravid of Axios, said that, yes, they have the authority to strike targets deep inside of Russia. We haven't really heard more about that from the United States, but this is General Kellogg on Fox News just yesterday being asked that question. You know, he's saying what Ukraine wants are not troops on the ground, but the ability to carry out strikes inside of Russian territory, and he's pressed on this. Now, the first answer is a little bit squishy. I don't like it. We're going to talk about it, but let's do one, and then we'll get a little more clear-cut answer with the second clip.
They've never asked for U.S. troops. They don't want U.S. troops on the ground. But what they do want is the armament and the ability and the authority to use it. And if they do that, I think it's going to be pretty well received.
Do they have the authority to use it?
Well, it's mixed. Sometimes they get some of the authority, sometimes they don't. And I think very carefully, everybody should follow what the president says. He's the commander-in-chief by the Constitution, and everybody falls in line. When the president says go left, you go left. If he says you go right, you go right. That's the president. The last I checked, none of us got electoral college votes. He did. So when the president says to do something, we just need to to do that and complete the action.
Look, there's walking a line here where we have to be diplomatic, and of course, you're not going to say it's free reign. It seems like we do want some ability to say, no, you can't do that. If Ukraine had something absolutely crazy that would put the U.S. in a very, very difficult situation. But saying mixed authority is not great. That comes across as, some people approve it, other people don't, and that's kind of how this was spun, was that at times the DOD was saying no when the president has said yes. My interpretation of that is the president has said high level, yes, the authority is granted, pending DOD approval for specific target sets. And then at times the DOD has said yes or no based off of the specific target. Now, we have seen some reporting in recent weeks that the DOD is essentially declining everything. So that's a different story. If they're not on the same page, that's a real problem. And to the reporter's credit here, she does push General Kellogg a little bit, saying, wait a minute, let's go back. That was not a very clear answer. Does Ukraine have the authority to strike inside of Russia? Here's what he had to say.
I just want to clarify. Are you saying, though, that it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president?
I think reading what he has said and reading what Vice President Vance has said, as well as Secretary Rubio, the answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuaries. That's one of the reasons I believe that this last week, and it has been confirmed, that President Zelensky asked President Trump to get Tomahawk missiles, which give you a depth. They're really good systems. America makes the best systems in the world.
Are we giving him the Tomahawks?
Well, that decision has not been made, but he's asked. I know that President Zelensky did, in fact, ask for them, which was confirmed by a social media post by Vice President Vance. That's going to be up to the president to do it.
Okay. All right, no such thing as sanctuaries. I like that. I feel like that expands the battlefield. An issue that I have had from day one is we have tied Ukraine's hands to fight this war a way that we would like, not necessarily the best way for them to succeed, survive, maybe even win on the battlefield. It reminds me of how we operated in Vietnam, in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we drew these clear boundaries on where we would go and where we wouldn't go, right? We would not cross into Pakistan, even though Al-Qaeda was there. We would not cross into Iran, even though Iran was providing a lot of the weaponry and training to kill American forces in Iraq. Things like that, where clearly it's not that big of an issue, or it's not a risk of our national sovereignty. We're not going to collapse as a country due to that war if we put those self-imposed parameters on how we're going to fight. In my opinion, we have applied that to Ukraine in a fight that is for their very survival, and it does not apply here. So I like Kellogg saying no such thing as sanctuaries. One of the areas that we've continually seen hit with a lot of these, even Western-provided munitions, is down in Crimea. That appears to be green light for anything and everything that Ukraine wants to go after. What we have seen recently is just the hammering nonstop. I'll play one of the videos here that just came out last week, going after Russian airfields and air defense targets in Crimea. It's like every other day there's a new video coming out showing successful Ukrainian strikes in Crimea. Now, we regularly get the Ukrainian view of this, but just today we actually got satellite imagery showing the effects of this strike here that Ukraine released last week on the Kacha airfield in Crimea. This is according to Russian sources who are viewing the same images. They say satellite images of the Kacha airfield in Crimea, which was attacked several times by kamikaze drones. The images confirm the destruction of one transport aircraft, AN-26. Only traces of fire remain on site. The debris has been completely removed. The second AN-26 is absent from the images, so read into that however you will. The images also show a crater from a strike near one of the BE-12s, which is probably not damaged. One of the BE-12s on the field was damaged and removed from the base. Another BE-12 was also removed. An attempt was also made to hit an Mi-8 helicopter, but no damage was found. The helicopter likely left the airfield or is located at another parking area. So this is always beneficial to get this, right? The confirmation from the actual strikes that Ukraine is carrying out inside of Crimea. I had somebody during a Q&A session on the podcast last week, the Unclassified Podcast, that asked about Ukraine kind of going all out with some longer range, larger munitions against Crimea. I don't think that's in the cards. I don't think it needs to be, because these small drone strikes are exacting a pretty heavy toll. I mean, we are coming up on 3 years in the war, and Ukrainian drones are destroying Russian fixed-wing aircraft parked on airfields in Crimea. That's wild. They are making it every day, every week, every month more and more untenable for Russian forces to continue to operate out of the peninsula. To me, that's the clear path forward. Why waste big munitions down there? Push those into Russian territory. Continue just the constant assaults with FPVs and bomber drones in Crimea. Now, there's an interesting article I wanted to share with you all that just came out, or I found it yesterday, talking about how Azov surrounded some Russian forces north of Pokrovsk. And I'm going to pull up a map here real quick to show you the area that we're talking about, and we'll kind of walk through some of this conversation. This was in the Times, where they say Ukrainian troops surround hundreds of Russian infantrymen, restoring hope after a brutal summer, and they say swaying Trump in their favor. And the interview here is with Lieutenant Colonel Lemko, who I believe is a battalion commander in the 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov. And we're going to zoom into the area on the map here that we're talking about. So this is Deep State map here. This link will be in the description as well. This is the area of the breakthrough, specifically up here. We're starting to see a number of different colors appear because we have recaptured or liberated territory by Ukraine, some of the unknown, and then Russian-occupied territory. This was the breakthrough, just north of Pokrovsk, which is one of the most heavily contested areas on the front down here. So this is what we're going to be looking at. He says here and here, pointing, they have a map that they're showing in the interview, but he says here and here, we cut them off. They are tactically encircled. Perhaps they can sit there for a month before they die, surrender, or withdraw. We are 40,000 against more than 100,000 Russians. We won here with maneuver, defense, and quick, quality decisions. Now, Azov, they say, was dispatched to this area back in August, and according to Lieutenant Colonel Lemko, the situation was already critical. The enemy had broken through the first line of defense. They could have broken through further into the operational strategic space. And the concern here, and we talked about this in a couple different interviews at the time that I'll have in the description below, had the opportunity to talk with a couple of the guys in Azov, the International Battalion specifically, Uno and Vegas, and they were talking about the tactics being utilized by Russia everywhere along the front, but it was showing success here, where this was not an armored column of Russian forces, pushing through, breaking through Ukrainian lines and advancing rapidly. It was groups of 1, 2, 3, 4 Russian soldiers that were guided along by Russian drones to gaps in the Ukrainian line, because there are not enough Ukrainian soldiers to man every single position in a continuous line all across the front. So rather than, we think of the Western Front like one large trench line across the entirety of the battlefield, that's not the case. It's a lot of outposts and kind of standalone fighting positions, and at times there are gaps to be exploited between those. Not big enough gaps to move, a battalion of infantry through, but enough of a gap to slip 2 or 3, 4 guys through at night walking on their own. And that's what Russia did, is they slowly moved individual soldiers up until they massed a fair number, and then they would push a little further, and then a little further, and then a little further. And next thing you know, there were Russian soldiers 20 kilometers past what was believed to be the front line of contact. That is when Azov and the 93rd and a couple other units were called in to clear this area out, mop it up, and stop the continued flow of Russian soldiers. And they talk about exactly how they did that. He said, first, the Ukrainians established a blocking position in the village of Zolotoy Kolodiez, so right here in the northern portion of the map. Then they started striking Russian logistics deep behind enemy lines between the villages of Oshitern and Malinivka. So we're going to zoom out here to give you an idea of what they're talking about. All on the same map. So we've got the blocking position up here in the north. This was the breakthrough just below that. Malinivka here, and Oshitern here. So what they're saying is that Ukraine started hitting some of the resupply areas and Russian troops moving forward behind the line of contact. So it was not just about blunting the front of the assault, but almost simultaneously, they said, we just have to make sure that they cannot reinforce. And that was a big question as we were assessing this breakthrough in the lines was, it's one thing to send a platoon or so of Russian infantry through, or more, as it accumulates over time, no doubt. But what's needed then is some sort of exploitation. So what Ukraine did right away was start blocking these areas here to prevent the exploitation of these gaps in the line. They say several thousand Russian infantry, about 15% of the overall force, had advanced beyond drone and artillery support, so the Ukrainians attacked their flanks, getting in behind them. It's likely what you're seeing up here in this area in Nikuchev Yar, where it's just too far for some of the Russian drones that were operating closer to the front down here near Pokrovsk to still support them. So these guys are kind of, they're cut off at this point. He says, when the Russians moved artillery, drone pilots, and logistics troops up, they were surprised to run into Ukrainian lines and were destroyed. Limko said, quote, "Once a Ural truck carrying a Russian artillery piece drove into our infantry position. Our infantry was in shock. The truck was hauling a Russian gun right into our position." So he's talking about a Ural truck is an unarmored vehicle or lightly armored vehicle. It is certainly not what you want to lead an assault with. It is susceptible, we'll say, to direct fire. So that's not something, if it's hauling an artillery piece, you expect to be 5, 10 plus kilometers behind the line of contact. So what they're saying is, as Russia was trying to move up some of these guns to be able to support their forward soldiers, they found out that Ukraine had actually plugged those gaps, and they were driving directly into Ukrainian positions, destroyed and captured. And they say as a roll-up, the first Azov Corps, which is a number of units here that were involved, claimed to have killed 3,785 Russian soldiers since reinforcing the sector between August 5th and September 21st, wounding 2,135 and capturing 71. They say they destroyed 28 tanks, 121 artillery pieces, and nearly 1,000 support vehicles. And the article notes that these claims cannot be independently verified. I expect we're going to get a lot more information about this breakthrough here before too long, both the positives and the negatives. We have not heard a lot from the Russian sources at this point, but they still have soldiers stuck in there. So I would expect some accounts of how they managed this breakthrough in the first place, and then the challenges and why they were not able to expand that bridgehead. Now, quick plug again, talking with a couple guys in Azov, Uno, and Vegas. I'll have that linked in the description below. They did a really good job explaining these tactics, and not just how the Russians are utilizing this new infiltrate. It's not a new tactic, but they're using it more and more recently. This infiltration tactic, but also how the first Azov Corps is unique in the way that they're able to redeploy for some of these use cases. You know, we think of so many areas along the front are relatively static, and you have soldiers manning trench positions, defensive positions for long periods of time, not a lot of maneuver warfare. Azov and some other units are designed for this. They're designed to be called up as a quick reaction type force, so they're not manning a position of the line. They move in quickly, conduct reconnaissance, punch the Russians in their teeth, break them off where they can, reestablish the lines, and then hand it off to the unit that is in control of that section of territory. So according to the battalion commander there, Limko, it sounds exactly like what he described. But that article, as well as a couple interviews with Azov, will be linked in the description below, as well as our ongoing fundraiser, which actually is helping Azov as well. They're one of the many units out there fighting in the East. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.